Welcome to another episode of You Are Not a Frog, Bullying in the Workplace. Now, I'm sure you can all think of multiple instances at work in which you've witnessed things that you would describe as bullying, and like most of us, you probably felt very uncomfortable and then let it go. The cost of speaking up was just too high, and quite frankly, most of us don't know how to speak up. So in this episode, I discuss this really common issue with Dr. Adam Harrison. Now, Adam has very personal experiences of bullying, and he's been prompted to look into this closely recently through his work with medical students. So have a listen if you want to know how humiliation and bullying affect professionals when they experience it and when they witness it. Listen if you want to know how to be resilient in the face of bullying and how to even start to do something about it. Welcome to You Are Not a Frog, the podcast for GPs, doctors and other busy professionals in high-stress jobs. Even before the coronavirus crisis, many of us were feeling stressed and one crisis away from not coping. We felt like frogs in boiling water, overwhelmed and exhausted. But this has crept up on us slowly, so we hardly notice the extra long days becoming the norm. And let's face it, frogs generally only have two choices: stay and be boiled alive, or jump out of the pan and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You have many more options than you think you do. It is possible to be master of your own destiny and to craft your life so that you can thrive even in the most difficult of circumstances. I'm your host, Dr. Rachel Morris, GP, turned executive coach and specialist in resilience at work. I work with doctors and other organisations all over the country to help professionals and their teams beat stress and take control of their work. I'll be talking to friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, so that together we can take back control to survive and thrive in our work and lives. Before we get started on the podcast episode, I just wanted to let you know about a fantastic time-limited deal that we're running this week. Now, as you know, I launched our Resilient Team Academy earlier this year. It's a membership for busy leaders and managers in healthcare and other high-stress organisations, which gives them all the training, tools and resources they need to get a happy, resilient and thriving team, even through these new ways of working. Now, I've had such great feedback from leaders who've used the resources and the done-for-you team resilience building activities in meetings with their teams with great results. And here's the thing, we're not launching the Resilient Team Academy again until spring next year. But as I can see how much it's helping teams and how much it's needed right now, I'm making it available at a very special price just over Black Friday. So this deal will close at midnight on Saturday. You'll have to be quick, and it will never be available at this price again. And you'll have to wait till next year to join if you miss it. I'm offering a 100% money back guarantee as usual. So if you try it out and you don't find it helpful at all, I will give you your money back, no quibbles. So why don't you check it out at the link given in the show notes below. You've got nothing to lose, so that you can join a supportive, thriving community of leaders fully committed to help their teams stay well, stay productive and thrive at work as well as home. On with the episode. So it's really great to have with me on the podcast today. In fact, back on the podcast today, Dr. Adam Harrison. And Adam is a GP. He's also a qualified barrister, and he's also an executive and leadership coach. So welcome back, Adam. How are you doing?
Yeah, well, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for having me back. Can't have done too badly first time.
Yeah, it's really good to have you back. And today we are going to talk about bullying and harassment in the workplace. And I know that this is something, Adam, that you have a sort of particular interest in. What sort of piqued your interest in this?
Well, it was sort of triggered recently, a few months ago, by an incident that one of my medical students experienced on her first ever clinical attachment. And she basically had this experience and she phoned me up to get a bit of advice. And she told me essentially she'd gone onto the ward. It was a big ward round. The outgoing team was still around. The incoming team was still around. So there were about 11 doctors on this ward round. And the consultant had asked her to go and clerk a patient. But he basically said, you've got 7 minutes to go and see this patient and then come back and present the case to me. And we're all going to mark you. So she went off and she did what good medical students do, which was she asked an open question to the patient, and the patient then proceeded to talk for about 5 minutes on the presenting complaint and history of presenting complaint, which left her with 2 minutes to get the rest of the history and examine the patient. By this stage, she knew it was about a chest infection, or she suspected. So she went for the money and examined the patient's chest and thought, well, this is all I can do. So she went back to the team, and in front of everyone, in front of the ward, the consultant said, right, present your findings, and then all of these doctors here are going to grade you. And she said it was one of the most humiliating and intimidating experiences of her life. And the consultant was awful to her. And there was obviously some discomfort among some of the other doctors. But she, didn't score particularly highly because she didn't get all the, the
She'd
information.
had 7 minutes. Yeah,
exactly. So, she was really upset afterwards, and she called me that evening and told me what happened. And I was pretty shocked, to be honest. And I was like, well, that sounds like quite terrible behaviour you've been on the receiving end of. And I was very sympathetic, and I made some suggestions as to what she could do about it. And it just, it just bothered me, and it kind of stayed with me, and it got me thinking about all the many times that I've experienced raw behaviour in my career, that I've been on the receiving end of it. And I mean, I just, off the top of my head there and then, I just wrote down the most prominent things that I could remember. And I have a list of, 8 things that have stuck with me. And bear in mind, I've been qualified for 20 years. And these 8 things are still I'm still carrying them around with me. And, some people might argue they're not types of bullying for whatever reason, because maybe they were a one-off, but they still had a really major impact on me. And I then started to sort of look into it, and I wrote a talk to give to the medical students, because I thought it was important to let them know that these things can happen, and to be kind of forewarned is forearmed, and to be prepared for it, really, and give them some, a toolkit as to what they can do if they're on the receiving end themselves. So, that's why it's sort of stirred me up. And then I put a post on LinkedIn about it, and it, got sort of 5,500 views and lots of good comments. And so there's clearly a demand out there for helping with this problem. So I think it's amazing that you're doing this podcast.
Well, thank you for being on. I think it's really interesting that, this has really stirred you up and actually unravel the problem. And we all know it's out there. And the problem is, I guess, traditional medical training is almost based on bullying. You got the traditional idea of the ward round in the, 1950s, 60s, 70s, where you've got the consultant yelling at all the juniors and the medical students. You get Sir Lancelot Spratt, is that and all these, it's made a joke of. And I think medical training has got an awful lot better, but there is still sort of that attitude that actually that is just normal for medical training by humiliation, which in any other words, it's training by bullying and harassment and shame. And I think it's not just medicine, although I think medicine is particularly bad, but I think that some of that can go on in law firms as well and other professions. So when is it just part of the culture, and when is it bullying and harassment, or can it be both?
So, I mean, it depends. If you look at the actual definitions of bullying, and excuse me while I turn to my notes because it's quite technical. So there's no legal definition of bullying itself, but it's usually defined as behaviour such as spreading malicious rumours, unfair treatment, picking on or regularly undermining someone, and denying someone's training or promotion opportunities. That's usually repeated, intended to hurt someone either physically or emotionally, and often aimed at certain groups, for example, because of race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. So, I say usually, and that's what it says on the uk.gov website. But, I personally think some of the one-off instances that have happened to me have been so very, very severe and premeditated, because I've had consultants with lists of things that they've gone through. So they've clearly thought very, very carefully about it, and they've planned it all. And actually planning adds an extra element. If you look at kind of criminal activities, when something's planned and premeditated, it actually makes it worse. So sentences are higher. So it kind of means it's a bit more severe to me anyway.
Right. But so if you bop someone on the nose in a fit of pique, that would get less of a sentence than if you had planned to go out and bop someone on the nose. And it's just like that with bullying and harassment.
I think so, because it's not a legal thing. That's just my opinion. And I also think that, it's a feeling most people have been bullied throughout their life at some point, be it at school or be it, as a young person at work or even an older person at work. So we're all kind of like familiar with what it is and how it feels. So if you feel like you've been bullied, then fair enough, But then obviously if it goes through a performance management process or something like that, then HR are going to look at it very, very carefully, aren't they? But I mean, I'd also say that the bullying can sort of come from anyone, not just your seniors. I think there's that thing about that power imbalance, isn't there? That power mismatch, and usually it's a more senior person to a more junior person, but it can be from anyone. I mean, I felt bullied by nurses on the ward in the past, and they don't have any jurisdiction over me. I felt bullied by patients, definitely felt bullied by patients into doing stuff that they want that I'm not comfortable with. Then there's the sort of threat that, they're going to complain about you. So, bullying takes a lot of forms and has various manifestations. But I know you wanted to talk about harassment as well. And that is something that does have a legal definition. And there's an act, the Protection from Harassment Act, 1997. And then there's all the protected characteristics under the Equality Act, 2010, that if you're sort of being bullied and it's related to one of the protected characteristics, then it's certainly harassment. And again, it can be face-to-face, by letter, by email, by phone, physical, verbal, non-verbal, So it's really, really varied, really. But that's the sort of official side. And then there's the sort of the cultural side, as you say. You mean more about within medicine, and whether it's just, as you say, I think, you said the kind of the teaching by humiliation. And I think we're all, we're as students, we're kind of, there's a lot of modelling that goes on, isn't there? And we look at that, and then that sort of becomes the norm to us, doesn't it? I had another medical student, a fourth year medical student down in Adelaide, tell me that she was on the ward and one of the residents, so like registrars, said to her, "Oi, girl medical student, you go and get this for me." And I said, "Blimey, he's a piece of work, isn't he?" She said, "No, it wasn't a he, it was a she." I said, "Oh my goodness, sorry, I assumed that." But, this female surgical trainee was just modelling on her seniors. And that's probably where part of the cultural side of it that you've mentioned comes from.
So we've all sort of grown up with the fact, the idea of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and all this ribbing that we got from our seniors, or the time when we were really bullied by the nurses. And I was bullied by a sister on a ward when I was working in Jersey. It was awful. And, but you develop a tough shell, and that's the way you get stronger. But like you said, it stuck with you that whole time, these incidents. And I can look back and think about it. And I think rather than making you stronger, it actually detracted from your work and often really impacts on your performance. It certainly impacts on team cohesiveness. I know there's been a lot of work around incivility in the workplace. What happens when either we are bullied or even when we see or we're present when someone else is bullied or there's nastiness going on?
Well, I mean, so from my own experience, I've, a couple of really what I thought were extreme situations. One time I actually had to walk off the ward in the middle of a ward round because I got so distressed. It was a cardiac surgeon who I hadn't been around on the first day, and he liked his warfarin, his anticoagulation regimen to be different from the units. He was a new consultant, and I'd missed his little talk about that. So I prescribed the anticoagulants according to the unit's protocol. And on the ward, at post-op ward round, there must have been about 10 of us on the round, and it was in one of those bays with 4 beds in, and all the other patients were in their beds as well. And he just started bawling me out when he saw the drug chart in front of everyone. And I just had to, I kind of kept it together, and then I just had to walk off. And then another situation was again with some surgeons, a couple of breast surgeons who I was a junior SHO. I'd never had house officers of my own before. I had no leadership skills whatsoever. And I tried my best, but again, I was modeling myself on how my SHOs had treated me. And I thought that was the norm. And obviously I made mistakes, and they went to one of the consultants and they told him about the things that they didn't like about my approach. And then they did a bit of detective work and started asking people in theatres and clinics and things about me. And they called me in, and they had a pretty much like a dossier of about 15 things that they kind of went through. And I just, it was so unexpected. It was such a bolt out of the blue. And I just sat there. It just rained upon me, basically. And I had tears just going down my face in front of these two consultants. And it was just awful. And then, of course, you can't concentrate for a while, can you? You kind of leave that kind of situation, and what can you do? But if it's something that, I think I'm quite resilient, and because they were sort of short, sharp experiences, I got over them quite quickly. I have good support network and so on. But there are people that aren't as resilient, people that don't have such support networks. And obviously, if there's something that's going on and it's going on day after day in the workplace, then their health will inevitably suffer. They'll develop anxiety, stress, depression. People commit suicide because of things like this. Obviously they can't concentrate, so the quality of their work suffers, and they may end up leaving the workplace. Did you want to talk specifically about in healthcare situations about how it can impact on patients and things as well?
It'd be good to think about that in a sec, but I just want to come back to this whole thing about concentration, because I remember reading something that, even if you're not the victim of incivility yourself, even if you're in, I think they did some research of some people in a resus situation, and if there's an argument or some harsh words going on between two of your team and it's nothing to do with you, your focus and concentration goes down massively as well, because our amygdalas immediately jump to, there's a threat going on, there's a threat, and puts you into fight, flight or freeze zone. And we've only got limited processing power that goes, in our prefrontal cortex. And if that is taken up with worrying about what's going on with those two, then of course that's less stuff to worrying about what's going on with your work and going on with the patient. So even if the incivility and the stuff isn't happening to you, but you're witnessing it, it's a problem. Would you agree with that?
Totally. That's an interesting paper you're referring to. It was in the research situation. I saw a really good article written by a coach and business consultant called Chris Whitehead called The Real Price of Incivility, which I can send you the link to.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll put it in the show notes.
And he talked about a paper in the Harvard Business Review from 2013 that was written by Christine Porath and Christine Pearson. And they basically were interested in the effects of incivility in the workplace. They surveyed 800 managers and employees across 17 industries, and found that when they were on the receiving end of incivility, 48% decreased their work effort. So almost half of them decreased their work effort. 78% of them said their commitment to the organization declined, almost 80%, and 25% admitted taking out their frustration on customers. So a huge impact on everyone there. But in terms of, as you say, sort of bystanders, in that paper as well, Dan Siegel, the neuroscientist, psychologist, was quoted as saying, all close relationships involve tracking alignment, attunement, and resonance between people. We track the signals of the other person, we align our state of mind with theirs, and finally we achieve a state of mutual influence. So as you say, if one of your close colleagues is off kilter because of something that's going on with them, then that's going to knock you off course as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. If you know someone's upset or in a mood or cross, it's very difficult to just get on with your own stuff, because you are very in tune with the moods and the emotions of your co-workers, aren't you?
Yeah, you are, absolutely. Well, I think Google, I don't know if you know about Google's Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute. Have you heard about that?
I've heard of it.
I'd not heard of it until I found this paper. And they're clearly very kind of sharp and clued up on this, because they realise that, that when people don't work well together like that, then there's problems with, lack of imagination, lack of innovation, loss of interpersonal and therefore collaborative working skills. And obviously an organisation like Google relies on innovation and imagination. So for them, it was a no-brainer, but they really looked into it with, got together a group of mindfulness, neuroscience and emotional intelligence experts and created this whole, what started off as an internal course, and the Search Inside Yourself Leadership Institute now is available to anyone who wants to do the courses.
That's interesting, because that makes perfect sense. I don't know if you've read Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a brilliant book, and I'll use it a lot when I'm teaching leadership and teamwork. But Patrick Lencioni says that the second dysfunction of a team is a lack of conflict. an absence of conflict. And the reason that's a problem is because you need conflict for creativity. You need to be able to bounce ideas off people and chuck ideas around and go, well, hang on, that won't work because of this, and that won't work because of this. And in teams that are dysfunctional, you have a lack of conflict because you are frightened of conflict. And why are you frightened of conflict? You're frightened of conflict because you don't trust that you can conflict well. And how do you conflict well? Well, it's about being civil to each other. It's about being able to go, that's a good point. You know what? I don't agree with that, and this is why, but not think that the relationship's ruined. So if you're in a team where you've got incivility, some bullying, harassment, just nasty behaviour, you're going to do your best to avoid anything that's going to bring up any conflict or piss the other person off, or in any way. You're probably just going to keep your head down and try to just do your best. And I guess the more hierarchical it is, the worse it is. But I think you made a good point earlier about actually, yes, hierarchy is a thing, and I guess you get more power if you're higher up the pecking order, but there are some people who have quite a lot of power that don't have any control. Think about, I think about some ward receptionists who are actually really horrible to the junior doctors and tried to make their lives a misery, and you've got all of that as well. So the incivility, bullying, harassment affects people across the board and massively impacts on your concentration, your performance. You can think of these really vital errors, like if you're a doctor prescribing, or you've got to make these difficult decisions, or if you're a lawyer working on a case that's, really, really critical, and you make a quick mistake. Well, these are mistakes that cost an awful lot of time, an awful lot of money, and an awful lot in human suffering potentially. Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that's so a couple of things that made me think about in that conflict being necessary commentary is that first of all, I think people aren't very good at being assertive when they need to be. So they either, as you say, they either go into their shell and withdraw, or they perhaps inadvertently are quite aggressive, deliberately aggressive, some people. But there's that sort of middle ground of assertiveness is a lot of humans I find not very good at. And I've got, quite a few medical students I'm coaching that I talk about, assertively saying no to things, when they constantly asked to do things. But and the other thing is, if you have got someone who is just so wary of conflict that they're not willing to get involved if there is some conflict and they see some injustice and they see someone who they feel is being bullied, there's this concept of the bystander effect. Have you heard of that? I've heard of it, but explain more. Yeah. So again, it's a little bit legal, but it's a social psychological theory that states individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when there are other people present. So it was kind of thought up in 1968, but there was a big case, an awful sexual assault and murder case of a woman called Kitty Genovese in the States in 1964. And it was reported, perhaps sensationally, by the press that 38 bystanders watched passively. And then it's been interesting because a lot of work has been done on that over the years to try and disprove it. And some good work has been done. But there was a study in 2009 published in the Journal of the International Ombudsman Association that says that in reality, there are dozens of reasons why people don't act on the spot or come forward in the workplace when they see behaviour they consider unacceptable. And the two most common reasons cited for not acting were fear of loss of important relationships, both inside and out of the workplace, and fear of what they termed bad consequences. Yeah. So I guess thinking of things like, well, if I speak up or put my head above the parapet, am I going to be next? Am I going to be the next victim? Or am I not going to get a good reference to get my next job or whatever? Yeah, if you're going for a job in that surgical department and your boss has just yelled at the medical students, if you say in front of people, actually, that's not great, and try and rescue the situation, then are you likely to get that job if you've directly contradicted that person? That's really tough. Well, you've undermined the authority of the bully, haven't you? And that's going to have consequences. Yeah. It's really interesting. I'm going to talk in a minute about what should we then do as a bystander. But I just wanted to ask, first of all, that incident with the medical students, did that consultant, was the intention to humiliate and bully her, do you think? Or do you think most people with their bullying and harassing behaviour, maybe the intention isn't to make the person's life a misery, but there's something else going on? What do you think? So I think in the case of that particular consultant, she had heard that he had a bit of a reputation for being like that to medical students. So
I wasn't there, but I presume it was intentional and just his style. And maybe, the first first tranche of new medical students on the firm for the year. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do this to them so that, they work harder, so that they, clearly I'm not going to give them the time to examine the patients properly and come up with a good diagnosis and all of this. So they're going to grade very badly from all the doctors. So that will give them a bit of an incentive to work harder. Do you know what I mean? I'm just I have no idea. I mean, I think you raise a really important point. With any of these things, I think firstly, it's important to look at the conduct that's being perceived as bullying or harassment objectively, and consider whether it could be an intrinsic problem. So in the case of my student, was she being oversensitive? Was she being paranoid? Was she anxious because it was the first firm? Are some people with depression more likely to, more inclined to see what may not be negative behavior as negative behavior, because that's part of the symptomatology, isn't it? And then there's as you say, was the behavior intentional? So look at the bully next. Could it have been a one-off? Is it a misunderstanding, a loss, a kind of people lose their temper. That happens. They don't necessarily mean to. And obviously, if they apologize about it afterwards, then that's a different story. But is it just a one-off loss of temper? Was it banter that's been misinterpreted? People have different senses of humor, and so some people just might not find it funny that some surgeons made some, kind of crude or crass joke, and it's like, well, this is just surgical banter or whatever, but it's like,
let's just interject here. Other forms of other people do bully. It's not just surgeons. We talk about surgeons a lot.
This guy was a physician, actually. This consultant was a physician. So
okay, there we are.
Balance things up a little. He's always been surgeons with me, but it might be like, well, I'm quite a demure individual, and I don't like hearing those sorts of words and language. So. But then the other thing is what's actually going on with the alleged bully. Does it reflect their own problems? Are they in a bad mood that day for a personal reason? And if that's the case, then you'd like to think that someone could take the alleged victim aside and say to them, look, it's not you. They're having a bad day. They're not normally like that. Depersonalize it. Try to see the bully as a human with reasons for doing what they did, which are not personal to the recipient. Their own work or life stresses, their own mental illness, whatever. And that can be really helpful and powerful, because, then it's like, okay, well, it's not about me, thankfully. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I don't feel like I've been bullied now,
I think that's really key, because we tell ourselves a lot of stories in our own head. They think I'm, that medical student, he'd never met her before. So he didn't know what she was like. So, but she might be saying, oh, he thinks I'm rubbish. He thinks I'm this. He's intending to cause, he's intending to do that. He's just a big bully. The consultant might have been thinking, well, I'm going to toughen her up a bit, and, but I've had a bit of a bad day, and, not another medical student. I haven't got time for this. There might be all sorts. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but we do often read bad intentions into people. And like you said, if you're in a frame of mind where you're tend to catastrophize or always put a negative spin on things, then you're going to see that more, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely.
So it's interesting what you said about what we can do about it. Like you said, so take someone to one side and say, no, don't worry. So I think that's really important, because I think when you confront people in a big group, then if they are feeling, if you are criticizing them in front of other people and they're feeling shame about it, then they will react very, very defensively and probably shoot the messenger, and things won't go very well. So do you think it's better to confront people in the group, or actually wait till the situation's over and then go and deal with it individually at a different time? What's the sort of general advice on that?
Sorry, do you mean the victim confronting the bully?
So either, I think. So if you are in a group situation where someone is, because actually most of this happens in a group situation, I'm thinking it's less likely to happen one-to-one, although it can. But if you're in a group, and let's first of all say you're a bystander, you witness some unpleasant behaviour towards someone else, you're the bystander, what should you do?
Well, we touched on this before, didn't we, in terms of, say, the medical student and the junior doctor and the consultant, and, undermining their authority. And you, as the bystander, you're torn, aren't you, really, between your caring nature and your duty to look after that junior person, that medical student, and the I need to keep this job. I've got another 6 months with this person who could make my life hell if I embarrass them by calling out their behavior in front of the whole team. I mean, calling it out is it has to be done, doesn't it? But I don't think in that scenario, doing that in front of the whole team is going to do anyone any favors, really. So I think you have to do it. I think it's like anything that's potentially sensitive that could inflame any situation is best done in private, isn't it? Behind closed doors and sort of take someone aside and not air your dirty laundry in public and so on. So that would be my approach.
Yeah, I think if there's anything, if you can see things getting out of hand, if you can buy some time or distract the situation or deflect to go, actually, should we move on to this patient? So you're not directly confronting it, but you're moving the situation on, and so you're not humiliating anyone or shaming anyone. You're just sort of distracting, and then maybe afterwards you might want to go and say, actually, I'm sure you didn't mean to, but I think the impact on that student, she hadn't had much time. I think she was quite upset. So do it in a very non-confrontational way, and there are some frameworks, aren't there? The Bocker framework is describe the behaviour, very descriptive, to describe the outcome, say what the consequences are, and say actually remember what the A stands for, but what actions, what actions you then want to take, and that could be quite helpful.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And obviously, you need to pick your moments, don't you? So when the bully is kind of in a better mood, a better frame of mind, and you feel like you've got their ear, it helps if you're got a good working relationship with them generally anyway, I think. But I think let's not forget the victim here. If you consider it to be bullying, then I think rather than the victim is going to feel like it's their fault. What have I done wrong? Why is this person, shouting at me? I must have, done something to upset them or whatever. So the person who is the bystander, I think, has to normalize it for the victim, let them know it's not their fault. That's the most important thing. It is not your fault. Yeah. It's so common. This is such a common thing that it's almost the norm. Sadly, it's almost the norm, and that you shouldn't feel any shame in it. And that you're not alone. Not only has it happened to other people, but also I'm here for you if you want to talk about it. Having an empathic work colleague is helpful because they understand, they've been in the situation with you. It's a lot, you can get more out of it than talking to your partner if they're non-medical, or your mum or something like that, I think, So having a supportive colleague, which kind of brings me on to, it just made me think of one of the strategies I was going to talk about later, which is I heard a story about someone who was being bullied by the CEO in their company. And they were not at board level, but a step below. So their line manager was on the board and worked directly with the CEO. And so one technique for someone who's being bullied is to bring another person in on the problem and create a supportive bubble. Obviously there's a wider toxic culture. This CEO had bullied a lot of people, but they got a little protective bubble with that one understanding person. And this person happened to be, as I say, on the board, worked with the CEO. Everything was told to her, and she was very sympathetic, and she used her position to influence the other board members. And ultimately, the CEO was actually got rid of in the end in this story. I think this is an unusual situation. But it's very helpful if you feel like the whole world's kind of against you at work, then if you can find someone to create a little protective bubble, that means so much. I think that can help people so much.
And where's the role of sort of HR in all of this? When should you be going and actually taking this further and saying, actually, this isn't okay. There's more we need to do.
So the general advice is to try and see if it can be sorted out informally at first. Now, there are so many variables that are going to dictate whether that's possible. Again, your confidence, your self-confidence, your assertiveness, your resilience and whatever, how much shame you feel about it. I mean, you might, as a house officer, and the professor has properly shamed you in front of everyone, you might just think that is too high a mountain to climb, isn't it? I can't possibly go to them and sort of have an informal word with them. Interestingly, with the cardiac surgeon, I did. So I lived on site. I lived on the hospital campus at the time. And I walked off the ward and I went to my flat and I just kind of gathered myself And then I sort of girded my loins and I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to tolerate that. I'm not having that. So I went to his office and he was there and he let me in. And I explained what happened. I said, I wasn't there for your teaching session on how you like your patients to be anticoagulated. And that's why I prescribed this, but you didn't even give me the opportunity to explain before bawling me out. And I think that's really unfair, and it's very upsetting. And he apologized to me there and then. Looking back, I don't know how I had the balls to do that.
Yeah, well done. But what you did, you described the behaviour. You didn't say, you shouted at me and, you were awful. You said, this is what happened. I wasn't there. And you raised your voice, and there's a reason for that. And I guess the icing on the cake was the impact on me was I felt very upset, very humiliated. Yeah. So next time, it would be great if you could just check in why I did, that thing. But the fact, I think that most people don't intend to cause harm or hurt. I think some people do. So there are some nasty people around, but most people don't really want to upset people. That's not their intention. But from whatever happened, they're feeling frustrated. They're feeling hacked off with the situation. They think that they're lumping one person in with a whole group of people that they think are useless or not doing this or that. And then it's their frustration and maybe some prejudice and maybe some things boiling over. But mostly it's, like you said, it's not necessarily personal against the one person. Yeah. And so calling it out and saying what you've seen on an individually with people, most people are really apologetic. And, if it was me, if I had bullied someone or done something that came across as bullying, I would be very upset and I would definitely want that person to come to me and tell me what I'd done.
Yeah.
Because if you're not giving people feedback, then how can anybody change or realise what's happened? And if in that case, for that medical student, if that consultant doesn't get feedback about their behaviour, well, they're just going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And if their intention wasn't to humiliate, but they genuinely thought it was a good way of teaching, then that's not fair on them either to be allowed to carry on with behaviour that's just appalling.
Yeah. And as far as I know, no one on the team called him out about it. So anyway, sorry, you mentioned about HR and things like that, and I went off on my little anecdote. But so if you try to tackle something informally, or you didn't feel like you had the confidence to do so, then talk to your manager. So I guess in the case of a doctor, well, that was awkward because he was my consultant, but then I guess you've got an educational supervisor you could go and speak to. So there's someone, or there's the dean responsible for the FY1s, isn't there, I suppose. Then you would go to HR, and then, you could take it through their performance management process if you, felt you were able to do that. There's always your union you could go to, BMA. It's an employment related issue, so they should be able to help you with that. They can perhaps help you take it down a formal grievance route if that's how you're going to go. Like with Dr. Day, took Health Education England to an employment tribunal. So you could go down that route. Obviously, it's quite long-winded and potentially expensive. ACAS also offer advice, the Advisory Conciliation and Arbitration Service. They have a helpline. So they're the, more procedural and legal things you can do. But obviously, there are other methods outside of that. I think it's also important to say, if the victim chooses not to call it out for whatever reason, and that's their prerogative, and they may have various reasons for that. Like they may just be wanting to get a good reference. May have only a few weeks left in the job, but they're just like, right, just keep my head down, finish the job off, and I'll be on to pastures new in a few weeks, so I can just put it all behind me. Then you can, you should kind of get behind them and say that was their choice not to call it out, and be positive about it. And also, I think if people that don't want to call it out, encourage them to think realistically about what they can and can't change. So like Stephen Covey's circles of control and influence, I know you're very into that with your resilience training. So, obviously they're not, potentially not going to be able to change the consultant or the bully's behavior. Potentially they may be able to. So then they need to change their reaction to it, don't they? Or, the way that they deal with it, trying to make that more positive. But there are some techniques that we can use to try and help. So don't you want me to?
I think, one thing that's striking me is we talked about assertiveness, didn't we, earlier? And I think the difference between assertiveness and aggression, actually, and if everybody can remember that assertiveness is about stating your needs, but also thinking about the needs of the person in front of them, then I think that works for both the victim. So actually, this is what I need, but I understand that you're probably having a difficult day and you see all these different people coming through and, blah, blah, blah. But also the person who's the bully, often we come across as aggressive when we don't mean to be. But what we're not doing is expressing concern and the needs of that medical student. So, I'm just thinking back to that thing in the first place, that medical student. Actually, if the consultant had said, okay, I know you haven't had very much time to do it. I'm sorry about that. We've been really quick, but just present what you've got. That would be great.
Yeah.
Same situation.
Completely different outcome.
But completely different outcome. And the medical student would have been fine. They said, okay. And rather than grading, say, okay, is there any quick pointers we've got? Exactly the same thing, but a different outcome.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
Leadership, isn't it? That's kind of, I think, the difference between good and bad leadership, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And we're out of time now, I'm afraid, but that's been a very fascinating. I don't think there's any quick, and there's no silver bullet advice for this, is there? But if you would have 3 tips to sort of combat workplace bullying and harassment, what would they be for people can do personally?
To combat it?
Or to deal with it, to deal with it.
Okay. So I think it's important to try and depersonalize it, if that's possible. Yeah. If it's maybe a one-off situation. If it's the first time it's happened and there's no kind of pattern of the behaviour, then assume that it's just a one-off and try and depersonalize it. And I think just try and find some support. Yeah. Within your team, if possible. And I think the other thing is, as you say, if you're not so assertive, just try and work on those skills to become more assertive and more influential, and ultimately use those skills to take the conversation to the bully to explain what they've done or how they made you feel, and persuade them to stop. But there's loads more we could talk about. Yeah. Thank you. I think my top tip would be don't deal with this alone. Like you said, get the professional help that you need, but also get the personal help and support from your peers as well, and that makes it a lot easier to deal with. So thank you so much for being on. If people wanted to contact you, how could they reach you? So email dr.adamharrison@gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Dr. Adam Harrison. I'm on Twitter, but that's not really so much for contact, but I'm under Dr._ad and medical leadership coach. I could give you those details. Yeah, give me the links. We'll put them in the show notes. So thank you so much. That has been really enlightening. And just to say to the listeners, please do get help. If anything in this podcast has affected you and you're starting to see patterns or realizing that there are issues that you need to deal with, please don't deal with it alone and get the help that you need. Thanks, Adam. We'll have you back again. I'd love to talk about this further. Thank you. And thanks, Rachel. Cheers. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.